Good morning.
Good morning.
Believe it or not, Zen or Chan or practice is real life. I think sometimes, it seems quite artificial, but it's our actual life. And I think the more we practice, the more the kind of boundary between our time of practice and our what we might think of as our ordinary life, more of that is erased. And there is a sense of, you might say, a continuity of discontinuity. Since we know that the person doesn't actually persist moment to moment, so to speak, someone is there. And that continuity of discontinuity doesn't amount to a real person. This is Buddha's teaching. But, we say someone's there. And how we relate to or consider that someone structures the whole world. And in our sutra reading that we do on Thursday evening, the Lankavatara Sutra that we've been reading, we've seen how often this concept, the Sanskrit expression satkaya drushti, meaning having a conviction of the existence of a persistent person. We've seen how important that is in the sutra, and how often Buddha shines light on that, and encourages us to notice how that is like the underpinning of practically everything. And it's so important that it's the first in the traditional list of 10 fetters, 10 things that bind us. It's number one, is to be convinced that there is an individual, enduring person. And this is the sense in which we can say instance, as Katagiri said, the universe is born with you and dies with you. Because each person carries a universe with him or her or them. And the pin of that is satkaya drishti, the deep, deep conviction that I'm here and the rest of the universe is out there. Buddha Dharma teaches us how to live in such a way that that really very, very deep conviction gets eroded over time. To the point where we can be said to slip free of it. I was quite encouraged after a number of years to notice that my trust in my unique individual existence had been eroded to the point where there was always room for some doubt about how, I'm separate from that person. And whenever that feeling would come up, there was some doubt. It's like, wait, am I? What do I base that on? How is that so when in practice, my sense of my life somehow extends beyond my body, beyond where I can reach. And in fact, one is kind of maybe at first beckoned and then eventually forced to this sense that actually those lives flow into and out of one another endlessly. Practicing Buddha Dharma makes it possible for us to avoid the pitfall of trying deliberately to get rid of this person who I think is here. For instance, to slaughter the ego the way, some perhaps misguided approaches to practice have seemed to suggest. If you attempt to surgically remove your own ego, as people sometimes do, that project is under the control of that ego. So it's really good to avoid that trap, and practice makes that possible. By bit by bit eroding our grip on wrong view, eroding our, as my friend Professor Thurman calls it, our misknowledge. So what we call our way is really, it's just one way. I was watching a YouTube video, and this very accomplished young man who's a martial artist was addressing the question of which martial art is the best. And he said he used to worry about that. But then, as he encountered various teachings and teachers, his whole family was kind of a martial arts family. So all of the kids and the parents were very engaged in that. And he said, so it's kind of like you do get the sense that you're sort of climbing a mountain. And he says, but the higher you get, so to speak, the more all of those paths seem to be converging somewhere in the mist. So if your path, our path, whatever it is, has a heart, then you don't have to worry about, well, maybe that path over there is better. So you will be ascending the same mountain. And of course, in Zen, we also get to say, no mountain, no ascent, no descent. Stay right where you are. Put your hands up. Oh, no, put your hands down in your lap. But still, after so many years, it still strikes me as peculiar to find myself not so much wearing a dress, which I always wanted to as a kid, but wearing Japanese clothes, or Chinese clothes in this case. And this inspired me to wonder, how is it that Westerners started to get into this Eastern stuff? I've been watching yet another YouTube video series, this one by a very interesting character, a Anglican clergyman who did a series of videos concerning the evolution of religiosity in the West. And recently he's been talking about how in the late 17th and in the 18th century, people's certainty about the picture of the universe that spiritual faith had presented them with began to be eroded. And was little by little replaced by the sense that what people considered physical reality and its various behaviors and qualities would provide the ground, the bedrock for people to understand how they are in the world. So in the West, anyone who has grown up in the last, I don't know, more than half a century, has grown up with this sense that actual reality is accessed through purely empirical means. So at some point, maybe in the late 19th century, some mostly some English people who had also grown up in that era and who were just coming into the era where even psychology was beginning to be presented as a relentlessly empirical pursuit, came to the conclusion that there was a science in Asia that fit the bill perfectly, and this science was, well, Buddhism, and that Buddha was a great scientist, and that Buddha was free of the burden of received faith and also taught a purely empirical approach. So then some Westerners decided that Buddhism, Buddha Dharma, allows us to be empiricists of the spirit, and never mind all that religious stuff. And more recently, some of our Western Buddhist scholars have pointed out that that's actually not quite right. And that Buddhism, as it's known in in the countries where it has deep roots and long cultivation, is actually quite religious. So, consequently, we have, we make offerings, we bow, we chant, we put on a dress. We have these gestures that are almost unknown in the West. As you know, some Westerners encountering Eastern cultures made a big deal about bowing. It's like, the Englishman bows to no man. And this caused a bit of trouble from time to time. So, while it's true that Buddha was a skilled empiricist, the context of his spirituality is as vast and mysteriously religious as any. So he did say, if you study very carefully your own body-mind, you will eventually find the path to freedom. And to many, this sounded like, well, it's just that's what scientists do in the laboratory, just careful observation and measurement. And look, see some of these Buddhists, they have these long lists of states of mind and so forth. It's just like science. Again, that's not quite right. Buddha said that yes, this empirical approach, this study of the self, will benefit you greatly, but there is a marga, to use the Sanskrit word. There is a path. So you could say, well, I'm just going to retire to my own little laboratory and study my body-mind, and I will achieve liberation. And while that's not impossible, it's good to remember that there are actually 3 treasures. There are 3 jewels. There's Buddha, his teaching, and a vast community of beings to practice with and to encounter and to benefit and to be benefited by. So, while to study the self is the way that the satkaya drishti, the grip on the conviction that there is a separate and enduring person, that's how that grip is released. You may find it helpful to have a wider context than just sitting in your own laboratory. And eventually, you'll be able to join the good Dr. Jung, who, as I think I said, when he was asked, do you believe in God? He paused a moment and then said, I don't need to believe, I know. And this knowing goes way beyond a kind of any kind of catalog of facts. It goes from the top of the head to the tips of the toes and beyond. And even satkaya drishti, even the conviction of a self, has to give way. Sitting here together like this is to cultivate the Buddha way. And You will be amazed, or maybe you already are, at how somebody said, the universe, the body, mind, self, and other. Somebody said, it's like a gourd in the water. You push on it, it spins in the sunlight. It has no definite shape. This is our life. So, whether that's religion or not, I don't know, but I'm pretty grateful for whatever it is. Do you have any questions today?
Oh,
Yes.
thanks for bringing the subject up. Sometimes think about it myself, and while you were talking, this personality thing. While you were talking, I was thinking of in terms of tenancy. My personality has a certain tenancy over this skin bag, and
Certain
eventually,
habits. Yeah.
and eventually the skin bag's going to disintegrate and fall apart.
Sure enough.
And so where's the tenant go? And I can't come up with much of an answer for that one, but...
Well, there isn't actually a tenant. That's kind of a thing.
He thinks he's a tenant.
Yes.
But, I'll be 70 this year, and I tend to think about these things more because I've seen what happens. Like my next door neighbor some months ago suddenly died. He was alone, he had no family. And I remember what happened was, basically the system takes over, and an administrator says, okay, back up the dump truck, get all this stuff out of here and dump it,
Yeah.
And naturally I don't want to leave that to my husband, so I've been working on getting the clutter out of my house because I don't want to leave him with the after effects of this skin bag.
Yeah, I need to do that too. Thank you for the reminder. Not that I have a husband, but I don't want to leave poor Harvest Street with my mess, so...
Yeah, there's all these pictures of, this is First Communion and all this other stuff.
Right.
So I'm going through all of this, I'll leave with my brother and so on. And it's a lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah, so that person who isn't there
it requires a lot of maintenance.
Yeah, right.
Anyhow, just thought I'd share that with you.
Thanks. Yes.
I've been thinking about kind of what you were saying about different paths leading to the same place, and how I also listen to the Robert Thurman podcast, and he talks about, I think he's mentioned a few times how the Dalai Lama says that people should just stick with their religion that they're born into, and doesn't encourage people to become Buddhists.
Right.
And that kind of struck me, and I've been thinking about that, trying to understand what he is getting at with that. And like for me, I think I was raised Catholic, and there wasn't. I think there were a lot of things in Catholicism that were misleading, I think, as to the nature of reality and existence. And I guess I don't quite understand how you can reconcile, like, for example, the belief in a soul and an eternal soul, and
Mhm.
and that it will go to heaven or hell or limbo or whatever after death, and like those kinds of things with the idea that you can stick with that religion and still have a realization of the
Mhm.
truth.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Well, most faiths, including Buddhism, submit to some degree or other of what the Hindus called Shruti, which means they become a received faith. And all you get is the principles handed to you, and you're expected to believe them and abide by them. So this tends to obscure any marga that might be present, any path that's actually present. And I had the same experience as you. It took me quite a while to discover, oh, there actually is a marga in Christianity. And you actually kind of need someone to tell you about that. And if no one's available, then you're stuck with Shruti, just what was received, you know? And all you have is what I started to call conventional pieties, you know? Say your prayers, go to church, blah, blah, blah. There's no marga there. Unless there's someone who can actually point you. So, well, actually there is, and this is what it looks like. And there are such folks in Catholicism. Unfortunately, they're not exactly, growing on trees, so to speak. I've had the privilege of meeting a few of them in my life, but I met none of them when I most needed to, which is when I was in high school. And as a result, I'm now wearing Asian clothing. So it could have turned out differently, but it didn't. But I'm not making any claims, saying from where I am on the mountain, which doesn't really exist, things look more and more and more the same than different. So I think what the Dalai Lama was saying was, wherever you are, whatever faith tradition you grow up in, find the marga there. And if you can't, then ask for help. And then maybe you'll need to actually go elsewhere. Sometimes that's the case, and I'm sure he would never deny that. But find the marga. Okay, well, as always, I admire your patience. Thank you very much.